Hey guys, tonight we step back into a world without telescopes, algorithms, or even paper, and yet somehow they still knew when the sun would vanish. You're in ancient Babylon, somewhere around 600 BCE, where the stars don't just sparkle. They whisper secrets to anyone patient and slightly obsessive enough to listen. You're about to meet a group of priests who can read the sky like a slow-moving newspaper, using nothing but clay tablets, moonlight, and time. And before you ask, yes, you probably wouldn't survive here. The food is spicy, the toilets are non-existent, and eclipses are considered full-blown omens of royal doom. Good luck. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing barefoot on smooth, sun-warmed stone, squinting into the honey-colored haze of a Mesopotamian twilight. The air smells faintly of baked dates, old parchment, and dust, a scent that's somehow both dry and sticky. The city of Babylon hums gently around you. Low voices, bleating goats, the rhythmic slop of a water wheel lifting irrigation buckets out of the Euphrates. A young boy rushes past you holding what appears to be a stick covered in scribbles. No, wait, it's a clay tablet still damp. He's running toward the ziggurat, the step temple that towers over the city like a giant, sun-drenched wedding cake. You follow. By the time you reach the ziggurat's broad base, twilight has deepened into a rich, velvet blue. At the top, a thin priest in draped linen raises one arm dramatically toward the sky. He doesn't look up. Doesn't need to. He's already announced the eclipse. There's a murmur in the crowd. Some people cross their arms and mutter. Some grab their children. One man just sits on a stone bench, staring calmly into the middle distance as if he's seen this all before, which, honestly, he probably has. The priest finally tilts his head skyward, eyes closing like a cat enjoying a breeze. It begins, he whispers. And he's right. The moon, plump and pale against the dusk, begins to drift into shadow. No gasps, no panic, just a quiet, uneasy stillness. You're herded up the stairs of the ziggurat by a middle-aged scribe who seems extremely annoyed that you're wearing sandals. Not great for climbing, he mutters. You'll scuff the edge. We just resurfaced it. The higher you go, the more the city below seems to flatten into a toy model. You can see the slow coil of the river in the fading light, and beyond it, endless fields of barley and date palms. Somewhere out there, oxen are probably still trudging along irrigation ditches, oblivious to the cosmic drama overhead. At the very top of the ziggurat, a kind of sacred observatory perches like a bird's nest. There's no telescope, just a low table made of limestone, some incense still smoldering, and a few deeply focused men who look like they haven't blinked since breakfast. One of them hands you a cup of barley beer and gestures to a bench. You're just in time. We recorded this eclipse 223 moons ago. Wait, how many years is that? He does the math for you. It's about 18 years and 11 days, give or take. That, he says proudly, is the Saros Cycle. But we'll get to that later. First, he insists you look at the sky. Not just glance, but really look. There's the moon, now halfway obscured by Earth's shadow. It looks less like a celestial body and more like a scoop of charcoal ice cream slowly melting into the night. Beside it, Venus twinkles, oblivious and slightly smug. And below that, a soft spray of stars. There are no streetlights up here. No glow from screens or glowing billboards. The night is pitch and precise, like a velvet blanket poked with pins. The priest tells you that this is the best view in all of Babylon, maybe in the whole region. He says this as if it's a Yelp review. 5 stars. Excellent shadow clarity. And this shadow, it's not just a curiosity. It's a message, a warning, a prediction come true. You ask how they knew. He shrugs. Time, clay, and a little stubbornness. Turns out Babylonian sky watchers weren't guessing. They were tracking. For centuries, they've been noting every moonrise, every shadow, every oddly timed storm that followed, and writing it all down, not on scrolls or paper, but on squares of clay the size of small lunchboxes. Some dry, some still damp, some crumbling slightly in the corners. You're led down a narrow set of stairs into what feels like the temple's basement, but it's not a dungeon. It's a library, a surprisingly dusty one. There are shelves. Well, not really shelves, just rows and rows of clay tablets, stacked like lasagna in open troughs. Some are etched with neat, uniform cuneiform. Others look like they were scratched by someone very nervous and possibly holding a chicken. Your guide picks one at random and holds it under a flickering oil lamp. This one, he says, notes a lunar eclipse that happened in the 7th year of King Nabamuken'zeri, and also mentions that a goat got stuck in the city gate. Both were considered signs. You try to read the cuneiform, but it's basically textured gibberish. Your guide sees your confusion and offers a translation. On the 14th night, the moon was eaten by shadow. The king's dinner was canceled. Well, that's ominously specific. He tells you these tablets are part astronomy, part gossip, part prophetic spreadsheet. Not all of them were accurate. Some got the dates wrong. Some are corrected years later with tiny add-on notes scratched in the margins. Historians still argue whether the Babylonians actually understood the cause of eclipses, he says, or if they just got really good at spotting the patterns. That's the thing. Even without knowing about planetary orbits or gravity or the relative size of Earth's shadow, they still got it right, again and again. The eclipse outside is almost over now. The moon is slipping free of its dark visitor, and the priests are already talking about the next one. Another 223 moons from now. You descend deeper into the temple's underbelly, your feet brushing fine dust and the occasional errant shard of broken pottery. The walls here are thick, cool, and silent, absorbing the low murmurs of the scribes working in long, dim rows. Your guide leads you past one chamber, then another, until he halts at an arched doorway framed with carved lions, guardians of knowledge, apparently, and gestures for you to step inside. The smell hits you first, a rich, earthy scent of clay and oil, with the faintest trace of old incense and maybe goat hair. The lighting is dim, but steady, oil lamps flickering in carefully placed niches that illuminate rows upon rows of shallow clay drawers. This isn't just a storeroom. This is a clay library. You step closer, drawn in by the gentle rhythm of the room. Scribes sit cross-legged on mats, their knees dusted with powdery clay, styluses in hand. They work methodically, almost meditatively, etching wedge-shaped cuneiform into damp tablets like they're writing personal diary entries to the stars. There's no chit-chat, just the soft scratch of stylus against clay and the occasional yawn. One tablet is handed to you by a boy no older than 12, his fingers smudged with clay, his eyes rimmed with sleep. He doesn't speak, just offers the tablet as if passing along something sacred. And when you look down, you're holding a celestial map. Not a map in the modern sense. There are no swirling galaxies or fancy constellations shaped like Greek heroes. Instead, it's a carefully plotted series of dots, lines, and strange clusters. Beside them, symbols marking dates, lunar phases, and scribbled notes about shadow durations. It's like an eclipse Sudoku, if Sudoku were 4,000 years old and written on mud. This one, your guide explains, record a lunar eclipse that occurred the same night a local merchant claimed to see a demon eating the moon. But we later learned it was just his donkey casting a shadow on the courtyard. You chuckle, but the priest doesn't. The donkey was sacrificed anyway, right? Of course. The thing is, this library isn't just for astronomy. These tablets cover everything from crop rotations to royal dreams. But the most carefully stored, kept in high, clean slots, and wrapped in linen, are the eclipse records. Some are organized chronologically. Others are stacked according to something called the Saros number, a term that makes your guide's eyes gleam with pride. That's how we predict them. Every 223 lunations, roughly 18 years and 11 days, the cycle repeats. And they've got the tablets to prove it. He walks you to a set of 3 long drawers labeled only with symbols, triangles, arcs, and what looks suspiciously like a fish wearing a hat. This is where we found the pattern, he says softly. It took generations. You imagine that, a family of priests, passing knowledge like secret recipes, each generation adding one more clue. A scribble here, a margin note there. Some tablets even bear tiny thumbprints, faint, almost childlike, likely left by long-dead apprentices who had no idea their doodles would survive for millennia. Of course, he says, not all tablets are original. Many are copies. We recopy them every few years so they don't break. You glance at a crumbled shard on the floor, a fragment of someone's sky notes, gone like dust. He shows you a wall niche with a half-dozen tools, styluses made from reed, bone, even bronze. The reed ones are most common, cheap, replaceable, and surprisingly precise. You try one on a practice slab of clay. It's harder than it looks. The wedge shapes require an awkward twist of the wrist, and if your angle's off, the whole symbol looks like a squashed beetle. Your attempt draws a polite smile from one scribe. Maybe stick to talking, he mutters. Despite the ribbing, the work here is meticulous. The scribes double-check each character, often reading aloud to each other in a kind of soft, murmuring duet. Mistakes are corrected with water and a flat scraper. The clay is resoftened, the sections smoothed, and the new character pressed in. But only once. If you mess up twice, you start again. No pressure, you mutter to yourself. One corner of the room contains tablets labeled anomalies. Your guide is hesitant to show them. They are awkward, he says. Times when the eclipse didn't come, or came early, or, he lowers his voice, lasted longer than it should have. These are the mystery entries. The ones with notes in the margins like the gods are displeased or consult the goat entrails again. Not exactly NASA-level diagnostics, but you have to admire the honesty. Historians still argue whether Babylonians truly believed eclipses were omens, your guide adds, or if that was just priestly PR. You tilt your head. He shrugs. If the king believes it, does it matter? There is again that blurry line between science and survival, between astronomy and astrology. In Babylon, the two aren't enemies. They're roommates. Before you leave the chamber, you're handed one more tablet. It's cracked at the corner, but the symbols are clean. Near the top is a symbol you now recognize as eclipse, followed by a few numbers and what appears to be a drawing of a scorpion? Ah yes, the priest says. That one predicted an eclipse and a good season for scorpion hunting. Very efficient. You ask if it came true. He leans close, lowers his voice, and grins. The eclipse, yes. The scorpions, not so much. You place the tablet back into its slot. It clinks gently, like stone against porcelain. Somewhere above you, the moon is back in full glow, lighting the Babylonian streets with its soft, silver calm. Down here, though, it's the clay that glows. Clay that holds the sky. Clay that remembers. A little sore from all the crouching, and your hands still dusted with the scent of ancient mud. The priest guiding you. His name might be in Lil something, but he hasn't offered. Leads you toward a narrow, open platform on the eastern side of the ziggurat. Up here, the breeze is cool, dry, and still tinged with the faintest whiff of ox dung from the street below. Watch, he says, pointing to the eastern sky, where the stars are beginning to push through the indigo velvet of night. That one's important. You follow his finger to a bright star hovering just above the horizon. Not a flashy one. It doesn't twinkle with dramatic flare like Venus, but it's steady. Anchored. That's Aldebaran, he continues. We call it the torch. Not because it burns, but because it tells us when the moon is lying. You blink. The moon lies. You give you a sidelong glance. The moon always lies. That's why we have stars. And with that deeply suspicious celestial wisdom, you settle in beside him as the night sky unfurls. Up here, the sky isn't a passive backdrop. It's a busy, ticking instrument. And the Babylonians? They read it like you'd read a train schedule. If that train schedule were written in 3 different calendars and occasionally predicted your death. The priest pulls a wax-coated board from basket, brushes off some crumbs, fig cake, maybe, and begins sketching the sky. Every star moves, he says, but not all move the same way. The moon? She's a wanderer, unreliable. But the stars, most of them stay in their lanes. He draws a curve. This is the moon's path. A few dots, and these are our markers. We watch how long she takes to pass each one. That's how we know she's up to something. You're essentially watching a 6th century BCE version of a lunar GPS. Each night, scribes like him come up here with wax tablets, star charts, and surprisingly accurate time-keeping methods, usually based on the length of water dripping through a calibrated pot. No ticking clocks, just drips and scribbles. You try to watch the sky as they do, noticing how the moon sidles up to one constellation, then creeps past another like a cat squeezing between furniture. Every motion means something, especially when it doesn't behave. See there? He points to a faint star, just barely visible. That one's Shuggy. If the moon covers it tonight, we'll have a shadow within 2 months. You squint. Covers it, like an eclipse? He nods. Maybe. Or maybe a storm. Sometimes the omens double book. Apparently, the moon's path relative to background stars was one of the key tools the Babylonians used to infer when an eclipse might happen. They didn't just track the moon's orbit in isolation. They timed its intersections with certain watch stars, especially along the ecliptic. That word, ecliptic, doesn't exist for them yet, but they know what it is, the thin road the sun, moon, and planets travel along the sky. And when the full moon crosses this road at just the right angle, that's when the magic or disaster happens. Tonight, the moon is behaving. But in Lil, you've decided to call him that now. Warns you not to trust it. The moon skips. Sometimes it runs fast. Sometimes it lags. Sometimes it disappears when the sky is cloudy, and the king thinks we're making things up. You ask how they account for that. What if they miss a night? He shrugs. We guess. But the tablets help. He means the goal year texts, a kind of predictive almanac where scribes copied past lunar behavior and projected it forward. Not by calculation, exactly, but by patterns. If the moon covered this star 18 years ago, it might do it again. If it lingered too long near Leo, that could mean a bad harvest, or just a lazy moon. Historians still argue whether these forecasts were based more on observation or faith, he says. Some say it was math. Others say it was divine intuition. He grins. I say both. Math is divine, no? You're starting to understand how this all worked. No telescopes, but clear skies. No algorithms, but an ironclad sense of time. And above all, the sky as a kind of calendar. One that repeats, sometimes roughly, sometimes beautifully, but always, always leaving clues. You lie back on the smooth stone ledge and stare up. The stars don't blink. They just shimmer. You try to imagine seeing this sky every night for 30 years. You probably start naming things too. You probably start seeing patterns. A moon that passed one star too slowly might suddenly seem suspicious. Look, Enlil whispers again. You follow his gaze to the southern horizon, where a low flicker of gold begins to rise. Jupiter, he says. They call him Marduk's sigh. You ask if Jupiter has anything to do with eclipses. Not directly, he says, but kings like it when we say it does. You can't help but laugh. Even here, in the cradle of ancient science, some things never change. You wonder how much of this was for knowledge and how much was for influence. Did these priests care about the stars for their own sake? Or was it more useful to appear all-knowing? Both, Enlil answers, as if reading your thoughts. Knowledge is power, but so is mystery. The moon is higher now. The skies will turn slowly. You watch it glide near a cluster of faint stars and wonder what note will be scratched into a tablet tomorrow morning. Maybe something mundane, maybe something ominous. You close your eyes and let the cool air press gently against your cheeks. The sky clicks onward. The stars keep time. Crests overhead, no longer shadowed, just calmly glowing like a polished bone in the sky. Enlil is still beside you, scribbling patiently onto a wax tablet lit by the flickering amber of a tiny lamp. He hums to himself, a tuneless, looping melody that sounds suspiciously like it was invented to keep time. He glances at you. You ready to get weird? He asks. You nod, obviously. And so begins your crash course in what the temple scribes half-jokingly call moon math, though there's nothing particularly humorous about it. It's dense. It's complex. And bizarrely it works. He begins with a series of dots on the wax slab. Each one represents a full moon. He make a mark next to every one where an eclipse was observed, either partial or total. Then he starts to count between them. 223, he says. That's the number of lunations between eclipse twins. You blink. Luna what? He raises an eyebrow. Lunation. A full moon cycle. From one full moon to the next. Right? That makes sense. Sort of. He leans in, his voice lowering, as if whispering a spell. If you count 223 lunations, about 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours, then the sun, the earth, and the moon will return to almost the exact same alignment. Almost. This, he tells you, is the Saros Cycle, and it's how Babylonians forecasted eclipses long before they had any formal sense of orbits or Newtonian physics, or, telescopes. You try to visualize it. A moon, a sun, the earth in between, casting its long shadow like a whisper across the sky. And somehow, by watching carefully, by counting every single moon for decades, they figured out the rhythm. Of course, it didn't always behave. Enlil explains that every few Saros cycles, things get slippery. The eclipse shifts slightly, drifts a bit, like a clock that ticks a little fast. That's the problem with the sky, he says. It forgets to be perfect. So they adjust. With what? More clay tablets, of course. Charts. Red ink marks in the corners. Occasionally, desperate guesses. You ask if they ever got it wrong. Enlil laughs, long, warm, and uncomfortably knowing. Of course. We usually get it wrong. Then he shows you a tablet labeled in bold cuneiform. Not words, just a triangle. The symbol for shadow moon. This one, he says, was created by his grandfather's grandfather. It contains 4 Saros cycles, copied and recopied over nearly a century. And right there, near the bottom corner, is a note that translates loosely to, shadow did not appear. Possibly cloud. Possibly incorrect goat. You laugh, then pause. Goat. Long story, he mutters. We're still not sure if the goat was the problem, or just present. Here's the thing about Babylonian eclipse prediction. It's not just cold science. It's personal. Families of scribes handed down charts and corrections like heirlooms. You get the sense these people knew the moon's moods better than they knew their own children's birthdays. And yet, they still called it guessing. Historians still argue whether they truly believed the Saros cycle was divine, or if they just hoped the math wouldn't embarrass them in front of the king. Enlil says, scratching behind his ear. Because if you called an eclipse and it didn't happen, that wasn't just bad science. That was potential treason, especially if you just told the king he'd be fine and then the sky failed to back you up. So you begin to understand the stress, the weight of it. Enlil lets you try your hand at making a lunar chart. He hands you a soft slab of damp clay and a stylus that looks like it's been chewed on by a very stressed astronomer. You scratch in a few dots. You draw a moon. You get bold and try to write the cuneiform symbol for shadow, but it ends up looking like a startled fish. Not bad, he says. A little fishy, but readable. You're starting to think these priests weren't just stargazers. They were data hoarders. Quietly obsessive, possibly sleep-deprived, but relentless in their pattern hunting. Enlil explains how the Saros cycle was never a secret, but also never truly fixed. It was more of a living thing, breathed into each new tablet, adjusted with every generation. Some cycles they even skipped if they didn't match observations. One priest, he recalls, tried to invent his own cycle, 238 lunations instead of 223. It didn't go well, mostly because his version predicted an eclipse every harvest, and after 3 failed forecasts, the king banned him from speaking in public. The priest later became a brewer. You stare back at the sky, where the moon now sits fat and harmless. You understand, suddenly, how much pressure it must have carried. One little misstep, one cloud cover, one mistimed goat sacrifice, and a whole dynasty could crumble. So the priest counted, carefully, painfully, for decades. They waited. They recopied. They didn't trust instinct. They didn't trust magic. They trusted patterns. Enlil hands you a small, flat tablet from a pouch at his waist. On it is a single line. Moon passes the bull star, one shadow to come. It's short, cryptic, possibly poetry, possibly a footnote to a greater chart. But it sticks in your mind as you hold it. He smiles. That one's yours. You tuck it into your sleeve like a lucky coin, even though it's basically just a brick. But still, there's something comforting about it. Solid. Proven. A message from the past that says, hey, we saw this too. Above you, the stars keep moving. But the numbers? The numbers are always waiting. The next morning, you're awake before the sun. Not by choice. You're woken by a combination of distant chanting, two exceptionally loud donkeys, and what can only be described as clay tablet filing hour. Turns out, even in ancient Babylon, record-keeping waits for no one. You roll off your straw mat and follow the now-familiar corridor that winds up toward the observatory. The temple priests are already in full swing, rubbing clay between their fingers, cross-checking lunar records, and muttering the kind of weary complaints that make it clear this process hasn't changed in centuries. But today, Enlil has something special to show you. Not a star, not a chart. A calendar. Not the kind with kittens or fun trivia facts, obviously. This one is massive, nearly the size of a door, etched onto a flat clay slab with rows and columns, so dense it looks like someone tried to encode the moon's biography in spreadsheet form. The whole thing smells faintly of burnt herbs, old oil, and intellectual anxiety. This, he says with pride, is how we plan royal warnings. You blink. Royal warnings? He taps one column marked with the cuneiform for eclipse. When an eclipse is expected, especially a solar one, we don't just note it. We prepare for it. And by prepare, he means something far more elaborate than lighting candles or huddling in a temple. It's full-scale cosmic diplomacy. You sit cross-legged beside the slab as Enlil explains that Babylonian priests didn't just predict eclipses, they interpreted them. And often, they did so with an eye on the throne. If a lunar eclipse happened in a certain month, he says, we might warn the king that illness was coming, or war, or that his second wife's cousin's astrologer was up to something. So yes, star data, but also politics. The calendar isn't just about tracking moons. It links eclipses to months, to constellations, to omens. A lunar eclipse in the month of Samanu? Possibly rain. But a solar eclipse in the same month? Definitely danger. Especially if it happens at sunrise. If the sun vanishes at dawn, Enlil adds, lowering his voice, it's a direct insult to the king. Like the gods couldn't wait for breakfast before sending a warning. And what does the king do when he's warned? Well, that's where things get interesting. You follow Enlil down a hallway lined with half-burned oil lamps until you reach a smaller room filled with robes, wooden masks, and one very confused goat. This, he announces, is the substitute king room. You raise an eyebrow. Apparently, when an eclipse predicted doom for the king, the Babylonians didn't panic. They got creative. They would temporarily remove the real king from power and appoint a fake king in his place. Usually a prisoner, a farmer, or some poor guy who'd wandered too close to the temple at the wrong moment. He'd wear the robes, sit on the throne, eat fancy meals, Enlil explains. And after the eclipse passed, well, he shrugs. You don't ask what happened next. You suspect it involves the goat. This practice wasn't fringe or secret. It was official. There are records of entire eclipse-prompted royal swaps, with notes on how long the substitute ruled, usually a few days to a few weeks, and whether anything bad actually happened. Sometimes it did, sometimes not. But either way, the logic was simple. If the god sent a celestial warning and something bad had to happen to a king, then better it happen to the decoy. Kind of like cosmic insurance. Historians still argue whether this was sincere belief, Enlil says, or political theater. Maybe both. He shows you a tablet from the reign of Esarhaddon, which notes an eclipse followed by the installment of a substitute king named Tukulti the Stable Boy. His reign lasted 11 days. It ends with the line, shadow passed, king restored. Tukulti returned to the stables. Not exactly a fairy tale, but here's the wild part. The eclipse predictions were accurate often enough to make all this worthwhile. They weren't guessing from gut feelings. They were using complex, multi-decade records of lunar movement, some of which are stored just meters from where you're standing. Back in the calendar room, Enlil walks you through a prediction method involving not just Saros cycles, but watch months. These are special periods during which scribes observed whether the moon's position matched expectations. If it deviated, adjustments were made to future predictions. One scribe, he says, even developed a crude correction factor for the moon's speed, noting that it seemed to change pace depending on the time of year. He didn't know about elliptical orbits, of course, but he knew something was off, and he wrote it down. That, Enlil says, is what makes Babylonian astronomy powerful. Even when we don't understand, we remember. You help him shift another large calendar slab back into its shelf. It's heavier than it looks. It makes a dull thunk as it settles into place, a sound that feels like it's sealing in 600 years of lunar memory. Enlil wipes his hands on his robe. You know, he says, we don't really watch the moon. You tilt your head. We watch the spaces around it, the stars behind, the silence after. You realize he's right. The moon happens, but it's the quiet mathematics around it that matters. The waiting, the counting, the readiness to act when the sky suggests something's about to go wrong, especially if it involves a throne. Above you, the sky has brightened. It's nearly dawn. The stars are vanishing one by one, swallowed by rising light. But the moon is still visible, pale now, fading into the blue, but present. You feel a sudden, strange affection for it. This moody, slow-moving rock that inspired an entire civilization to watch and wait and write. And you wonder how many eclipse warnings are still waiting, hidden in tablets that no one's touched in centuries. You don't realize how much the moon has been on your mind until you look down and notice you've absent-mindedly traced its shape into the dust with your toe. A crescent, then another, then a circle. Maybe it's contagious, this lunar obsession. Back inside the temple's observatory, you find Enlil fussing with a stack of rectangular tablets, each marked with what looks like the same crescent-shaped symbol in slightly different orientations. He waves you over, his sleeves caked with a dried mixture of ash and clay. Today, he says, we read the sky from last year. You're confused at first, but he explains that this is a regular ritual. Once a year, the priests gather all the observational records from the previous 12 lunations and check them against the predictions made, 18 years ago. Memory, he says, is our telescope. Each tablet in the stack represents one lunar month. You pick one up at random and skim the tiny wedge-shaped cuneiform symbols. It's like reading the diary of the moon, what stars it passed, how long it lingered when it rose, whether it looked anxious, yes, that's an actual term, and if anything weird happened. There's even a weather note, clouds. Chicken stayed inside. Helpful. The priests compare these records to older cycles. If the moon's path and timing match those from a previous Saros cycle, that confirmation they're tracking is accurate. If not, they revise the future predictions. You think modern scientists invented peer review? Enlil mutters, scribbling a correction in the margin. This process is called retrospective eclipse tracking, using past patterns not only to predict the future, but to test whether earlier forecasts were accurate. If something doesn't line up, they don't panic. They recalibrate. In your hands is a tablet from 17 years ago that predicts a lunar eclipse would occur in the 11th month. On the matching tablet from last year, a different scribe has scrawled, "Shadow began late, duration too short, omen ambiguous." King informed, goats unimpressed. That's one way to put it. Enlil walks you to another part of the observatory, an enclosed courtyard open to the sky, with stone markers arranged in strange, geometric clusters. You count 7 of them, each placed in deliberate alignment. These aren't altars. They're measuring tools. This, he explains, is our gnomon array. You blink. Gnomon. He chuckles. Not gnome. Gnomon. It casts a shadow, right? You squint at one of the upright stones. The top is rounded, polished. As the morning sun rises, its shadow stretches perfectly across a carved line on the courtyard floor. That line marks solar noon. But more than that, it tells them when and where the sun should be on any given day of the year. That's how they check the calendar's drift. That's how they know the moon is, as Enlil often says, misbehaving again. You never thought tracking eclipses would involve so many rocks. This leads him into a careful explanation of something called the Saros Cycle, a sort of supercycle made up of 3 Saros cycles, or roughly 54 years and 33 days. Why triple it? Because the regular Saros cycle shifts the eclipse's visibility location on Earth each time. If an eclipse was visible over Babylon today, it likely won't be visible here again until the 3rd cycle. So if you miss it, he says, you wait 54 years. Or move to Egypt. Historians still debate whether the Babylonians understood this larger pattern completely, or whether they simply noticed certain eclipses came back around every 5 decades and decided that was good enough. They didn't use trigonometry, Enlil admits, but they had memory and patience. You begin to realize that this whole operation, the charts, the tracking, the celestial arithmetic, is built not on a single person's genius, but on relentless teamwork across generations. No computers, no telescopes, just clay, oil lamps, and people willing to sit through years of mostly boring sky watching for a few moments of lunar drama. And when those moments come, when the moon finally does what the tablets predicted, it's not just astronomy. It's vindication. Enlil pulls out one final tablet. This one's different. It's framed in a delicate wooden case, slightly scorched at the edges. This is from a year of the twin eclipse, he says softly. You lean in. The tablet notes a lunar eclipse in month 4, followed by a solar eclipse in month V, barely 30 days apart. Both predicted, both visible, both correct. The tone of the writing is excited, almost breathless. A rare double confirmation. You can feel the pride of the scribe who etched those lines. The shadow kissed both lights. The sky did not lie. You glance at Enlil. Did something big happen? He smiles faintly. No, but for once the priest got a raise. You don't ask how much. There's a breeze now, rising for the east. The temple flags flutter slightly, casting shadows that fall across the stone calendar in strange angles. It feels like the past breathing again. You realize that for the Babylonians, prediction wasn't just about avoiding disaster. It was about proving that the universe could be known. Not tamed, not controlled, but understood. At least a little. And if you could predict something as mysterious as the moon eating the sun or slipping into shadow, maybe you could predict smaller things, too. Floods, harvests, even kings. You stand, brushing clay dust from your hands. The eclipse will come again. It always does. You step back into the archives, now lit by the rich gold of mid-morning sun filtering through carved windows. Inside, it smells like warm dust, cracked leather, and the faint sweetness of old oil ink. Priests move around you in practiced silence, carrying bundles of tablets like waiters balancing plates, except these plates might contain prophecies. Today you and Enlil are on the hunt for something specific. Omens. Not the fire and brimstone kind. No thunderclaps. No dramatic thunderbird sightings. These are quiet omens, baked into clay. He brings you to a wall of cubby-like shelves, each labeled with short inscriptions. Lunar omens, solar omens, animal deformities, market prices, and yes, your personal favorite, unusual goat behaviors. You gesture toward that last one. We'll get there, Enlil says. But first the moon. He pulls a tablet labeled Enuma Anu Enlil, Tablet 20, and blows the dust off with a reverent little puff. This tablet is one of many in a vast omen series that recorded observed eclipses and their supposed consequences. It begins with dry, factual notes, date, position, which stars were obscured, and then takes a sharp turn into interpretation. If the moon is eclipsed on the 14th day, Enlil reads aloud. And it begins in the east and clears in the west, the king of Akkad will be safe. You raise an eyebrow. That's oddly specific. He nods. Very. But so are eclipses. That's why we believe they meant something. For the Babylonians, the sky wasn't just a source of data. It was a divine language. The gods didn't use words. They used shadows, positions, light. Every eclipse wasn't just an event. It was a message. You just had to know how to read it. And if it wasn't the 14th day, you ask. Enlil flips to the next line. If the eclipse happens on the 13th day and the sky is red afterward, enemies will invade from the west. You both pause. Unclear if they meant all enemies, he mutters. As he goes through more of the omens, you begin to notice a pattern. The direction of the eclipse's onset, east, west, north, or south, mattered. The color of the moon after the eclipse ended mattered. Even whether clouds appeared during the eclipse was important. If clouds obscure the moon during an eclipse and dogs howl, famine is likely. You glance out the temple window. Just blue sky. No dogs. Enlil adds, "We called these signs Satu, which means something like written commands from the gods, even if no one understood them." Historians still argue whether these omens were based on accumulated observation or entirely myth, he continues. But it's likely a bit of both. We weren't just guessing. We watched the patterns and then assigned meaning. In other words, the omens were early probability tables, wrapped in divine poetry. But how seriously did they take these? Very. There are tablets detailing elaborate rituals to cancel out eclipse omens. You'd think a lunar shadow would be final, but no. There was paperwork, chanting, even substitute goats. Yes, they're back. In one corner of the archive is a tall jar filled with rolled wax scrolls. Earlier drafts, Enlil explains. Some scribes tried to revise omen interpretations after the fact. You pull one and read a note scrawled into the margin. Eclipse did not bring illness. Revised meaning, protection of Ishtar. You ask if changing omens after the fact wasn't cheating. Enlil shrugs. It's not cheating if the gods change their minds. You start to see how this whole system served both science and statecraft. Predicting an eclipse made the priests look wise. Interpreting it made them look powerful. And revising it, when necessary, well, that made them useful. But these omens weren't always about kings and armies. Some are unexpectedly domestic. He shows you one that says, if the moon is eclipsed and the east wind rises, barley will be abundant. Another, if during eclipse a man dreams of burning bread, his house will prosper. Yet another, if an eclipse begins and a chicken lays a black egg, all treaties will break. That last one never actually happened, Enlil admits. We think, of course, not all omens were so descriptive. Some were just warnings. One tablet contains only 3 symbols. Roughly translated, shadow, fire. Wait, you get chills, and not from the temple draft. What's striking is that the omens often came with instructions. If the eclipse predicted danger, there were specific actions to take. Burn incense, bathe the king, send runners to the western border. Or, more often than you'd think, fast for 3 days and don't touch the goats. You raise the obvious question. So, did they work? Enlil smiles. Sometimes. When they didn't, we blamed the wrong ritual, or the wrong priest, or the weather. Typical. You head back toward the courtyard where the other priests are now gathered, reading today's sky. The moon is long gone, sunk below the horizon, but the next full moon is already marked on the charts. Preparations begin weeks in advance, especially if it might be the wrong kind of shadow. Before you leave, Enlil hands you a small clay tag, just 2 inches wide, strung on a bit of twine. Etched into it is the symbol for safe eclipse, a little crescent nestled beneath a feather. It's an old charm, he says, from the last eclipse season. Keep it in case this one surprises us. You slip into your pocket, its rough edge brushing against your thumb. A tiny fragment of a massive, ancient system built on careful watching, firm belief, and a heavy dose of just in case. Above the temple, the sun climbs higher. No shadows today, but they're always on the schedule. You step outside into the early afternoon heat, the dusty air wrapping around you like an old blanket, familiar but never quite comfortable. The temple's thick mud brick walls radiate warmth, and somewhere nearby, a small fire crackles, sending up wisps of fragrant cedar smoke. The city hums faintly beyond the temple gates, a distant mix of merchants shouting, animals braying, and the occasional clink of a potter's wheel. But your mind is still tangled with shadows and signs. You're about to see how the Babylonians went beyond just recording eclipses and omens. They built an entire mathematical system to predict them. You meet with Nabu, the temple's chief scribe, who is hunched over a table strewn with clay tablets covered in cuneiform. His fingers are stained black from the ink of reed pens, and he has the look of a man who's been staring at numbers for days without sleep, which, as it turns out, he has. Nabu begins explaining something called the Saros Cycle, a concept you've heard of but never quite grasped. It's about patterns, he says, tapping a tablet with a stylus. Eclipses repeat every 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours, roughly. But not exactly. You imagine waiting almost 2 decades for your favorite lunar shadow to return. Why not exactly? You ask. Well, Nabu replies, because the moon's orbit is a bit eccentric. It wobbles. It doesn't like to keep appointments. He gestures to a diagram etched onto a tablet, showing overlapping circles and zigzag lines. The path of the moon's shadow crossing Earth's surface in a series of shifts. It's like the cosmos version of a heartbeat, with each cycle slightly off-tempo. This discrepancy means that while an eclipse might repeat, it shifts geographically. The moon's shadow might fall over Babylon once, then 18 years later touch Egypt, then again somewhere else entirely after another 18 years. To see the exact same eclipse from the same spot, you'd have to wait 3 Saros cycles, a total of about 54 years, just like Enlil mentioned earlier. You pause, letting that sink in. Predicting eclipses is like trying to catch a train that stops at your station only every half-century. Nabu points to a series of tablets stacked in neat piles. These tablets contain intricate numerical tables, part of a system called System B, which calculates the moon's and sun's positions using arithmetic sequences. It's an early form of celestial algebra. You realize, though the Babylonians didn't think of it as math. It was magic, pure and simple. You ask how they performed these calculations without zero or negative numbers. Nabu smiles and shrugs. We had ways. The Babylonians used a base 60 system, sexagesimal, which suited the sky well. 60 minutes in an hour, 60 seconds in a minute. It's all from us. You laugh, picturing an ancient accountant proudly saying, if it's good enough for the gods, it's good enough for me. Historians still argue whether the Babylonians' methods directly influenced later Greek astronomers or if the knowledge was lost and rediscovered. But one thing's certain. The clay tablets contain some of the most precise astronomical data until the Renaissance. Nabu taps a tablet called the Goal-Year text. This text records the intervals between eclipses, essentially a celestial calendar, with the kind of precision you'd expect only from obsessive moon watchers. You ask if they had instruments to help measure time precisely. He pulls out a small water clock, a ceramic vessel with a tiny hole in the bottom that lets water drip at a steady rate. A Babylonian hourglass, in essence. It's crude, but effective. Timekeeping was crucial because even a minute's difference could throw off eclipse predictions. The water clock sat alongside sundials and gnomons, a toolbox of technologies that, combined with mathematical genius and patient record-keeping, allowed the Babylonians to predict eclipses within a day or two, an incredible feat for an age without telescopes or calculators. You wonder if they understood what caused eclipses. Enlil had hinted at gods swallowing the sun and moon, but Nabu has a more pragmatic take. We saw the shadows, the timing, the cycles. The gods might have sent the signs, but the shadows? They were real. Still, you suspect that this blend of myth and math kept the system alive, because numbers alone are cold, but stories warm them up. You glance back at the tablets scattered across the table, knowing that each of these fragile clay rectangles carries the fingerprints of centuries of careful observation, obsessive calculation, and a deep desire to make sense of the ever-shifting night sky. You step outside again, squinting up at the pale blue sky. The moon won't be full for a while, but when it is, you'll be ready, just like the Babylonians. The afternoon sun dips lower, casting long shadows that stretch across the temple courtyard like lazy fingers reaching for the earth. You take a slow breath, feeling the dusty warmth settle deep into your skin. The scent of baked clay and crushed herbs mingles in the air, an earthy perfume that feels oddly comforting. You find yourself wandering toward the scribe's quarters, where soft murmurs of reading and scratching clay accompany the fading light. Tonight, you're going to learn about the art of recording, how these ancient astronomers transformed fleeting moments in the sky into enduring tablets. The clay itself is soft and pliable when freshly dug, but here it's the temple's most prized raw material. After shaping a tablet, scribes would press their reed styluses into the wet surface, creating wedge-shaped marks that are surprisingly elegant. You imagine the steady hand it must take to make those marks flow like a quiet conversation. One scribe, a young woman named Sulpi, invites you to watch her work. Her eyes are sharp but gentle, the sort that notice details others miss. She shows you a tablet she's been copying, one of the most important eclipse records. What you see here, she explains softly, is not just the event but its rhythm. She traces a line of cuneiform that describes the moon's position in the zodiac, its brightness, and the exact timing of the shadow's appearance. You notice she includes small circles and dots, an early form of annotation, like footnotes in a dusty book. What's remarkable is that the Babylonians didn't simply write down what happened. They created systems of notation that allowed others to calculate, predict, and cross-reference. Sulpi's tablet even notes the length of the eclipse, a detail that fascinated her. She tells you that eclipses could last from a few minutes to over 3 hours, depending on the alignment. It's a variable they tracked carefully because longer eclipses were often seen as more significant omens. You ask her about mistakes. Surely, clay tablets can't be edited like modern paper. She smiles knowingly. We don't erase mistakes. We write corrections nearby or on the tablet's edge. Sometimes we make a new tablet altogether. One day, she says, she hopes to create a tablet that holds a complete Saros Cycle, 18 years of eclipses recorded in a way that anyone can read and understand. It's an ambitious goal, but you realize it's the kind of quiet obsession that built this entire system. As you watch her work, you recall a quirky fact you read earlier. Some tablets include tiny drawings of animals or gods next to the text. One even shows a goat with a mischievous grin standing under a crescent moon. It's unclear whether this was a scribe's doodle or a symbolic marker. You chuckle quietly. Goats are everywhere, you say aloud. Sulpi nods. They're stubborn, like the moon. Historians still debate the exact role of these illustrations, whether they had ritual meaning, were mnemonic devices, or just a bit of ancient graffiti. Whatever the answer, they add personality to the cold, hard data. As the sun finally slips below the horizon, casting the temple in cool twilight, you consider the immense patience and dedication required to keep this knowledge alive. The scribes weren't just copying records. They were crafting a language that connected generations. Outside, the stars begin to appear, tiny pinpricks of light against the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, the moon is circling patiently, waiting for its next performance. And thanks to the tablets, the Babylonians knew exactly when to watch. The night has settled fully now, wrapping the city in a deep velvet cloak dotted with stars that twinkle like distant fires. The temple's courtyard is quiet except for the soft rustling of leaves and the occasional call of a night bird. You find yourself sitting on a low bench beside a shallow basin of water, the cool surface reflecting the moon's pale light. You're thinking about something curious, how the Babylonians actually used their eclipse predictions day to day, beyond just lofty divine warnings and priestly rituals. The system was not only a matter of cosmic curiosity, but deeply woven into Babylonian politics and society. Enlil had mentioned earlier that eclipse predictions were often delivered directly to the king or regional rulers. You imagine how nerve-wracking it must have been for those leaders, hearing that the gods might be unhappy or that dark shadows could mean unrest or famine. Priests didn't just whisper ominous warnings. They provided precise dates and times for upcoming eclipses, often months or years in advance. This gave rulers a rare sense of control, or at least the illusion of control, over the unpredictable world. You recall a tale from the archives. King Ashur-bal-kula, centuries after the earliest tablets, famously hid inside his palace during a predicted eclipse, covered in sacred linens, surrounded by protective charms. The city's gates were shut tight. Soldiers patrolled the walls. The people held their breath. When the eclipse came and passed without catastrophe, the king's prestige soared. It was like a cosmic high five. But eclipse predictions were also used politically. If an enemy ruler's region was due for a shadow, Babylonian scribes might emphasize the danger, subtly undermining the rival's power. You muse that it's not unlike modern politicians citing weather reports to stir public opinion, except with celestial shadows. There's also the practical side. Farmers relied on eclipse cycles to plan planting and harvest times, as some eclipses coincided with seasonal shifts. The Babylonians noticed that eclipses sometimes aligned with the flooding of the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, a vital event for irrigation. In this way, eclipses became a kind of celestial calendar, a gentle guide through the rhythms of nature. You also learn about the temple rituals that surrounded eclipses. Priests performed careful ceremonies, lighting lamps, burning incense, reciting prayers, to soothe the gods and protect the city. Sometimes a substitute king was appointed during an eclipse, acting as a cosmic decoy to absorb any ill fate. It's a strange, comforting idea, someone else standing in the shadow, letting you stay in the light. The temple's granaries even had tablets that recorded offerings made before and after eclipses, a record of gratitude or appeasement. You're struck by how deeply eclipse prediction intertwined with everyday life, politics, agriculture, religion, and community. It wasn't just astronomy, it was survival. Historians still argue how much ordinary Babylonians trusted these predictions versus seeing them as ritual theater. But one thing's clear. The tablets and the knowledge they contained gave people a sense of order in a chaotic world. You lean back, watching the moon's soft glow through the temple's open archways. The night feels a little less mysterious, but no less magical. Because now you understand the dance behind the shadows, the patient watchfulness of ancient astronomers, their clay tablets clutched like lifelines. The moon will rise and fall, darkness will spread and recede, and the Babylonians will be ready. The night deepens, and you feel the cool weight of silence settling over the temple. The air is crisp now, with a faint scent of dried herbs and the subtle metallic tang of clay dust. You trace the outlines of the star patterns above, wondering how the Babylonians felt when they looked up centuries ago, just as you do now, searching for meaning in the vast expanse. Tonight, your thoughts turn to the astronomical instruments the Babylonians used alongside their tablets. While you've seen clay and reed tools, it's time to imagine the devices that made their observations possible. First, there's the gnomon, a simple but clever tool, a vertical stick or pillar planted firmly in the ground to cast a shadow on a flat surface. You picture standing beside one at dawn, watching the shadow stretch and shrink as the sun arcs overhead. This basic sundial-like device gave the Babylonians a reliable way to track time and seasons. But the gnomon wasn't just a clock, it was a cosmic pointer. By carefully recording the shadow's length and direction, scribes could estimate the sun's position relative to the Earth's horizon, a key factor in understanding celestial cycles. Next, you think about the merkit, a type of ancient astronomical sighting instrument, a wooden bar with a plumb line used for aligning stars. Imagine a priest standing in a field at night, holding this bar steady, waiting for a particular star to line up with a reference point. The silence of the moment is profound. No sound but the distant call of an owl and the whisper of the wind. This precision allowed the Babylonians to mark important dates, including the rising and setting of stars that signaled the coming of seasons or religious festivals. A quirky detail you uncover is that some tablets suggest the use of water clocks during the night, measuring time by the steady drip of water rather than the sun's movement. These ceramic vessels, sometimes called clepsydras, required constant attention, as even slight changes in temperature could speed up or slow down the flow. Historians still argue whether these instruments were accurate enough to pinpoint eclipse timings down to the minute or if they served more as rough guides supplemented by the scribes' calculations. You appreciate how these simple tools, paired with the Babylonians' mathematical genius, formed a practical toolkit for decoding the sky's mysteries. It's humbling to think that such humble objects, sticks, wooden bars, dripping water, laid the groundwork for predicting events that would inspire awe and fear for millennia. As you lean back, the cool night air brushing your skin, you imagine the sense of wonder and quiet triumph those early astronomers felt when a shadow crossed the sun just as their tablets predicted. You realize that in those moments, the vastness of the universe felt a little more knowable, a little less daunting. And you too are caught in that ancient dance, one of shadows, light, and time. The sky deepens into a richer black, the stars glimmering like tiny lanterns scattered across a vast celestial tapestry. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders, feeling the cool night settle around you as the temple's flickering oil lamps cast gentle shadows on the mud brick walls. Tonight, your thoughts drift to something more delicate. The cultural stories and myths the Babylonians wove around eclipses, blending their scientific observations with timeless narratives. You imagine a gathering inside the temple, families seated on woven mats, whispering tales under the soft glow of firelight. These stories helped people make sense of the fleeting darkness, turning an eerie natural event into something comprehensible and shared. One common myth tells of the sun god Shamash being temporarily swallowed by a cosmic dragon or demon during an eclipse. This creature, sometimes called the Great Serpent, was thought to swallow the sun or moon as a test or punishment from the gods. You picture children listening wide-eyed as priests recite these tales, the shadows outside flickering like the beast itself. It's a story that both frightens and fascinates, a reminder of nature's power and the god's will. Interestingly, some tablets hint at a more playful side of these myths. There's mention of the god Nergal, associated with the underworld, sneaking in to play tricks on the celestial bodies, an ancient cosmic prankster causing the temporary disappearance of the sun or moon. You smile at the thought. Ancient versions of a mischievous friend pulling the curtains closed during a favorite scene. These myths weren't just for entertainment. They served a vital social function, calming fears and reinforcing the authority of priests who could interpret the signs. The Babylonians believed that by performing specific rituals, chanting incantations, offering sacrifices, lighting lamps, they could protect the city from the dragon's wrath, coax Shamash back into the sky, and ensure the cycle of day and night continued unharmed. You learn that eclipse myths varied between regions and periods, sometimes portraying the celestial event as a battle between gods, sometimes as a moment of cosmic rest or renewal. Historians still debate how much these myths influenced the Babylonians' scientific approach. Did belief in dragons and demons push them to predict eclipses more precisely, hoping to minimize their surprise? Or did their growing mathematical knowledge gradually reshape these stories into metaphor rather than literal truth? The answer seems to lie somewhere in between, a dance between faith and reason. You feel a comforting warmth from these ancient narratives. They remind you that even in a world without modern science, people sought understanding through stories, laughter, and ritual. You imagine lying beneath the stars, wrapped in blankets, hearing those whispered tales, the steady cadence of voices mixing with the cool night air. The darkness of the eclipse becomes less a threat and more a shared experience, an ancient lullaby sung softly by the skies themselves. The early hours of the morning creep in softly, the horizon just beginning to hint at dawn's pale glow. You sit quietly near the temple's entrance, feeling the gentle chill settle over the city's sleeping streets. The world seems poised on the edge between night and day, a perfect moment to reflect on the legacy of Babylonian eclipse knowledge and how it traveled across time and space. You think about the many hands that must have copied those clay tablets, the generations of scribes who labored over fading inscriptions, each preserving and refining the knowledge. It wasn't just Babylonians who admired these predictions. Their work inspired later civilizations, from the Greeks and Romans to Islamic scholars and beyond. You can almost hear the quiet whispers of ancient travelers, clay tablets in hand, crossing deserts and seas, sharing eclipse secrets like treasured letters. One of the most fascinating tidbits you discover is that the Greeks borrowed heavily from Babylonian astronomy, particularly the concept of the Saros Cycle. Hipparchus, the famous Greek astronomer, is said to have used Babylonian data to refine his own eclipse predictions. You smile, imagining the surprised Babylonians hearing centuries later that their calculations had traveled so far. Historians still debate how much of Babylonian knowledge was directly transmitted versus independently rediscovered. But one thing's clear: without these early records, the history of astronomy would look very different. You consider the tablets themselves, many of which were lost to time, buried beneath ruins, or destroyed by conquest. Yet some survived, painstakingly preserved in museums and collections worldwide. Touching a clay tablet today feels like holding a whisper from the past, a reminder that human curiosity and the quest for understanding are timeless. You also think about how modern astronomers now predict eclipses down to the second, with satellites and supercomputers crunching numbers far beyond what Nabu and Sulpi could have dreamed. Yet, the Babylonians' achievement remains extraordinary, a blend of patient observation, clever math, and a bit of cosmic magic. You let yourself drift into the thought that perhaps, in a way, all those ancient predictions were acts of hope. Hope that even as the sun and moon vanished behind shadows, the world would continue turning and life would go on. As dawn breaks, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and orange, you feel a quiet gratitude for those long-ago watchers of the skies, who, with nothing but clay and reeds, managed to glimpse the rhythms of the universe. You stand, stretching slowly, the day's first light warming your face. The cycle continues, shadow and light, night and day, mystery and understanding. And now, so does your own. The sun now fully rises, bathing the temple in warm, golden light that filters softly through the palm fronds. The air is fragrant with blooming flowers and fresh bread from the nearby market. You wander through the city streets, imagining how daily life continued around these cosmic observations. The sounds of merchants bargaining, children laughing, and priests chanting from their clay tablets. Today, your mind turns to the mathematics behind the predictions, a realm where numbers and patterns took on almost mystical significance. The Babylonians didn't just watch the skies. They developed an early form of algebra and geometry that allowed them to calculate when eclipses would occur, sometimes years ahead. You picture a scholar, hunched over his tablet by candlelight, carefully noting sequences of numbers, some repeating, some changing subtly. This method, known as periodicity, was the backbone of their eclipse forecasting. The Saros cycle you've heard about before is just one example, a roughly 18-year pattern where eclipses repeat with similar characteristics. The Babylonians identified this by comparing records of past eclipses, noticing that the shadows returned on a predictable schedule. But the math wasn't simple. Their number system was sexagesimal, based on 60 rather than 10, so they juggled calculations with a base you might find baffling at first. It's a bit like trying to count in minutes and seconds all the time, but applied to days and months. You can't help but chuckle imagining the scribes trying to explain this to someone from a decimal world. No, it's not 60, it's 60. It sounds like an ancient version of today's "it's complicated." Quirkily, some tablets reveal that the Babylonians considered eclipse intervals to be fickle, not always exact, requiring adjustment. They even noted eclipses that almost happened or were too small to see, showing an empirical flexibility you might not expect from a civilization often seen as rigid. Historians still argue whether the Babylonians fully understood the orbital mechanics behind eclipses or whether their predictions were mostly based on pattern recognition and luck. Either way, their methods paved the way for future astronomers to uncover the true causes: Earth's tilt, Moon's orbit, and the dance of celestial shadows. You sit back, appreciating the human curiosity and ingenuity that turned vague observations into mathematical systems. For a moment, you feel connected not just to the ancient scribes, but to every person who has ever looked up at the sky wondering, when will the darkness come next? The cycle of shadows continues, a silent clock ticking through the ages. The day edges toward afternoon, the heat rising softly from the sun-warmed stones. You wander back to the temple, feeling the weight of centuries pressing gently on your shoulders. It's almost time to close this chapter of the journey, the final piece of the puzzle, the human stories behind the science. You imagine the lives of the scribes, priests, and kings who depended on these eclipse predictions, not just as abstract data, but as part of their daily rhythm. You think of Nabu, the god of wisdom and writing, watching over the scribes as they inscribed their knowledge into clay. Their work was meticulous, sometimes tedious, but always vital. It was a sacred trust to translate the heavens' whisperings into words. One fascinating detail you recall is how eclipse tablets often include personal notes, observations about weather, political events, or even the scribe's mood. It's a reminder that behind every prediction was a real person, living in a complex world. You also think of the quiet tension eclipses brought, anxiety mixed with wonder. Was this the moment the gods were displeased? Would the city be spared? The air must have been thick with anticipation. Yet, despite the weight of those moments, there's a gentle humor too. The Babylonians recognized the moon's stubbornness, sometimes hiding, sometimes shyly peeking out early. It's almost as if they had a cosmic trickster to keep them on their toes. Historians still debate how much of Babylonian eclipse prediction was science, how much ritual, and how much hopeful guessing. What matters most is the legacy they left, a tradition of looking up, measuring, recording, and dreaming. As the afternoon light softens, you feel the cycle of shadows and light settle within you, a calm rhythm connecting past and present. It's a reminder that beneath the vast sky, humans have always sought meaning, and that sometimes the most profound answers come from watching patiently and listening carefully. You let your eyes close slowly, the temple sounds fading into a gentle hum, the memory of clay tablets and eclipses softly weaving into your dreams. The sky darkens gradually in your mind's eye, the shadows lengthening like soft whispers. You breathe deeply, letting the gentle cadence of ancient stories lull you further into rest. Remember the quiet patience of the Babylonians, the scribes tracing stars with steady hands, the shadows crossing the sun as an old friend's soft visit. No hurry, no fear, just the eternal dance of light and darkness, moving slowly and surely. Let your thoughts float like the clay dust settling after a day's work. You are safe, cradled in time's gentle rhythm, wrapped in the calm embrace of night. Now, as your breath slows and your body relaxes, feel the echoes of ancient wisdom settle deep, a peaceful hum beneath your thoughts. Sleep well, beneath the same sky they once watched. Good night.